You want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered. And this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Doug Collins Podcast. Glad to have you with us. To say this day is an understatement. This is Monday, first day of RNC convention. You'd think we'd be talking about that. We're talking about Biden. And you would be right. I mean, we would be, except for one thing. President Trump survived an assassination attempt on Saturday night at his rally in Butler, Pennsylvania. Although it was not it was not completely without tragedy. There was some that have lost their lives, including the shooter, which deserved to lose his life in this case, but also a 50-year-old father who lost his life by attending the rally as well. This has just been a very sad weekend for that and the case that has gone on, again, as we get ready for RNC convention this week. Also, we're getting breaking news here for this Monday as we come to air about the documents case in Florida. And I think this is an interesting case. We'll talk about it a little bit this morning as well. But lots to go on. Let's get it started right after the break, and we'll be right back. We are experiencing instability at every level. Our government lacks leadership, and Bidenomics has been a disaster. The economy is in a fragile state. Inflation has been a consistent issue. High interest rates have put significant pressure on the real estate market, and there have been major bank failures. And many analysts say a stock market correction is likely overdue. We have global conflicts in Europe and the Middle East that have potential to spread, but gold has soared to record highs even among the tensions. There are so many reasons that Americans should consider investments in gold and silver, and Legacy Precious Metals is the gold standard. I love Legacy Precious Metals because of their zero-hassle, education-first approach. They can help you roll your traditional IRA into a gold IRA or ship metals directly to your house. That's what I do. So go to www.legacypminvestments.com to download their free gold investment guide. And look, I've read it. You need to read it. There's so much valuable information in there. So, friends, now's the time to not roll the dice with your hard-earned money. Find out about the growth potential that gold and precious metals can offer you. Contact Legacy Precious Metals today and tell them that Doug Collins sent you. You might have heard Mike Lindell and MyPillow no longer have the support of the box stores or the shopping channels as the way they used to. They've been part of the cancel culture, so they want to pass the savings directly on to you by having a $25 extravaganza. When Mike started MyPillow, it was just one product company. With the help of his dedicated employees, they now have hundreds of products. Some of you may not even know about that. So to get the word out, I want to invite my listeners to check out the $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-pillow use MyPillows are just $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. Their 6-pack of towel sets, $25. Brand new 4-pack dish towels. You guessed it, just $25. And for the first time ever, the MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, just $25. All orders over $75 will see free shipping too. This amazing offer won't last long, so go to mypillow.com and use the promo code Collins, that's COLLINS, or call 800-986-3994 today. That's promo code Collins. Okay, let's break this down into sort of two parts. We're going to start off the day with, let's just set the stage from where we were on Friday. Thanks, Chip and James, for filling in on Friday's Finest. Great job, as always, gang, to fill that in. But let's catch us up since then. In less than 72 hours since the last time we gathered here on the podcast, the world has changed. And it's changed in ways that right now we're not sure completely what that will be. I mean, there is some questions out there. How much is this changed in the world? Because Donald Trump, as we just said just a few moments ago, survived an assassination attempt in which, if he hadn't have turned his head in a moment, we would be having a very different conversation today. And I think that is the tragic part of this as we're looking at the tragedy of one being killed and others being critically wounded. I mean, this was a disaster of just epic proportions. It could have been, from a different perspective, a political perspective, far worse. But I want to minimize the actual loss of life. And as I was saying on an interview with a news agency this morning, I said, this was, we're talking so much about President Trump here, and that is viable and very real, and we need to acknowledge that. But also this lapse of security, which we're going to get to here in a minute, actually cost people their lives. And so this is one in which, we're here looking at a campaign that was already monumentally changed by a debate debacle 2 weeks ago by Joe Biden, and that is now changed again. Let's lay it out, break it down very, very simply. It's the way I like to do it. You guys on the podcast, I love you listening. And by the way, also go to the DougCollinsPodcast.com and you will find the email link. The email link is back working. Thank you. Some of you have been emailing me, and I appreciate that. Please go to the Doug Collins email, DougCollinsPodcast.com, and hit the email button, and you'll be able to email me your thoughts about the show, your thoughts about where we're headed. Love to hear from all the folks out there in the podcast world that are listening. But let's break this down. Number one, on the surface of going into Saturday, let's take it at 5 o'clock Saturday afternoon. The world was politically in the balance of normal, but Trump was going to a rally that he does all the time, and the Biden was at his beach house in Delaware, which again, all the time, and nothing was happening until almost 6:11 on Saturday afternoon, Eastern time. The shooter begins to fire. Trump has turned his head to look at a chart that was on the big screen and was nicked in the ear where the bullet hit his ear. The bullets then also found victims in other places behind Donald Trump. Now, that in and of itself changes the whole landscape. But I want to hit first what has also changed this landscape, and that is what appears to be and is a serious lack of oversight, planning, negligence, whatever you want to call this. Granted, I am glad the Secret Service agents jumped on top of the president. I'm glad that he fell down so that and dropped down so that he was behind the barrier, so he would not be in the line of fire anymore. I'm glad to see that they jumped on and then attempted to get him out of there. Again, I'm going to leave the personal movements of the president because there's still a lot of questions there coming back. But what bothers so many of us is, how did this happen to start with? How did you have someone within 150 yards of the stage with clear line of sight be able to crawl across a roof and get off these shots? How is it they had members, that has been confirmed on multiple occasions now, that members of the audience, if for lack of a better term, is at the site telling police there's somebody bear crawling across the roof of this building with a gun? How does he walk a mile from what, again, reported reports? How does he walk to this venue carrying a rifle to this venue? The just absurdity of this is immeasurable. We are now having reports that a local law enforcement agent climbed up to look. The guy turned his rifle at him and he climbed back down. Did nobody at that point radio anyone to say, look, there's a guy with a rifle on the top here. Somebody needs to do something. And this was all before he fired the shots. All before, in time when they could have removed Donald Trump from the situation. But that didn't happen. What we had happen was he was allowed to get off shots that injured the president and killed others and injured others. I have been to many, many events with the President of the United States and the former President of the United States. Not just Donald Trump. I've been to events with George Bush. I've been to events in which, you had the President Obama was there. You had others. These are just, I cannot comprehend how seemingly negligent this was on the part of the Secret Service and those who are doing the forward planning on this. A building in direct line of sight, a building that was uncovered. I have been to these events before, and every building around in a perimeter had law enforcement on it. And if it wasn't Secret Service Secret Service on top of it, or special operations squads from either even FBI or Capitol Police, there was always special operations squads or even plain. I mean, they're just regular officers from the local venues that were patrolling buildings, patrolling cars, patrolling all around the outskirts of the venue. Nowhere close could you get to having a shot at the podium with no obstruction, without somebody knowing it. Now, I hope that they will have someone else besides the Secret Service and the Department of Justice investigate this. I don't think there's anybody that has watched either one of these organizations over the past little bit trust completely that they can do an unbiased investigation of what happened. I'm hopeful that not only Congress will step in, but I'm also hopeful that there may be even actually something, an independent body brought in to say, okay, what happened and why did it happen and how can we make it stop? It just heightens also the other need that Secret Service has been denied. The RFK Jr. has been denied by the Biden administration detail by the Secret Service. And this is a man who is a Kennedy who's running against Joe Biden, who has had his uncle assassinated and his father assassinated. I mean, again, the stunning issues that have been going on that many people have been talking about for a while now have unfortunately brought the pain of the pain that is unspeakable to these families in Pennsylvania over what should have been it should have been just a normal event. It should have been just a regular. I'm trying to really just sort of think the right word here, because if you don't look at this in perspective without trying to get upset, it is, frankly, very difficult. And when you talk about Corey Compitor, who was killed, 50-year-old firefighter from Buffalo Township, Pennsylvania, he's 50 years old. There's not innocent bystanders here. These were people that were killed through the lapse in communication and the lapse of negligence from the perceived negligence of the Secret Service. Now, as we move forward in this, that has already come from the left and the right, and that we unite and we get behind this and we put behind the rhetoric. Look, I am tired of these discussions going on, and the only people ever held account for, quote, rhetoric is the right. The right says something that the left doesn't like, and it makes the New York Times front page. Anything the right says is terrible. Anything the left said is overlooked. You don't believe me? Just look at the last, little bit. Look at what has been said about Donald Trump. Right now, on newsstands, New Republic magazine has a picture of Donald Trump superimposed upon Adolf Hitler with a mustache. That is on the newsstands right now. Don't tell me that the rhetoric has to tone down, and it's a right problem. I mean, you look at this. Look, I'll make a statement. Any threats of violence against any political candidate or political office holder on either side of the aisle from right or left is wrong, period. But I'm tired of it always being that everything on the right was held to critical standards, nothing on the left was held to critical standards. When Maxine Waters would say, I want you to follow Trump supporters and Trump administration officials and harass them wherever they go, nothing was ever done. When nothing was said about when Pelosi and others, would make comments about, the non-comments about violence against the right. Nothing was said. And now you have a situation in which the president, Biden, is calling for a downtick in rhetoric. What about his own Twitter account, which called Donald Trump a threat to democracy. Now, let me just say that is code language for he'll tear up America as we like it. That's what the code word is. Because we're a republic, by the way, not a democracy. So let's just get over that and get over ourselves pretty quickly. But that's what they're saying. They're saying that there is an existential threat to the very existence of a 200, almost 50-year-old country made by one man if he's elected, who, by the way, has already served 4 years and never did anything that the left was accusing him of going to do, of destroying this country, ripping up the Constitution or anything else. He didn't do any of it. Just be quiet. I think Joe Biden has fallen into dementia and even earlier, possibly other issues, and is not fit to be president right now. But again, that is for the ballot box to decide. That is for people to go out and vote him out. It is for the cabinet who is enabling this mess to happen. It's for his staff. It is for his family. Those are issues why we have a 25th Amendment. Those are the issues why we have elections. I don't want anybody to take that into their own hands. And that is not violent rhetoric. That is just honest political opinion. I think he has harmed America. I think he's turned us on a wrong path. Did he destroy America? I don't think so. Because I believe Americans are strong enough to see through the far left's agenda for this country. But when we understand this, I mean, he gives a speech in Philadelphia with two Marines in the background and a red backdrop. I've talked about it you can go back and look on our podcast. I talked about the red speech. This was one of the most just unhealthy speeches ever given by a sitting president. The State of the Union address this year was nothing but a political address against those that they don't like, the quote MAGA Republicans, which, by the way, make up almost 50% or made up 50% or better of this nation and over 75 million votes. You know, look, we need to be better. But the left has to be held accountable. The right is always seemingly being told what we can and what we cannot say, and this is wrong and this is not. And the left always seems to get by with it. Not now. Look, I want to have a race for the next 3 months that focuses on the fact that Joe Biden is an abject failure and is not quite capable of continuing to hold the nuclear codes in the briefcase that it goes with him everywhere he goes. I want him to explain why he has opened our borders and opened our communities up to not only drugs, but illegals and the crime that has been perpetrated by illegals on Americans that should have never been here to start with. I don't care how many or how little, it should never have happened to start with. I want him to explain why he decided to ramp up inflation for 20%, up over 20% over the time when which inflation was less than 1 or right at 1% when he first came in. I want him to explain to the American people why he continues to spend money knowing that it was rising inflation and he chose to do it anyway. I want to know why Joe Biden would actually agree to curtail our own energy production while at the same time going begging to Venezuela and Iran and others to get oil that we could be pumping here. I want to know why he's chosen an agenda that puts Americans out of work while then going and having to get the same product from overseas. Those are all legitimate discussions and need to happen. And right now they were losing on every one. So all they had to do was to demonize Donald Trump because they couldn't win on the issues. Yes, I'm upset about this. Yes, I'm frustrated about this. We've been talking about this for days and months on this podcast. So take it as you will. Let's see what happens this week at the RNC. We're going to talk about it. We may have a couple of special guests from the RNC here on the podcast, maybe for Wednesday. So just hold on to go. But I'm actually looking forward to seeing what would actually happen in this week, how they frame these issues, how they talk about these issues, and how we come out of Thursday with a plan to beat Joe Biden this fall. That's what we need to do.
Hey, inflation's at a 40-year high. The stock market looks more uncertain than ever. The new central bank digital currency is on its way and could be the government's ultimate surveillance tool against Americans. It looks like the government is playing games with your savings and retirement. So what are you going to do to help protect yourself? Did you know that you can have physical gold and silver into your IRA or 401k with zero tax or penalties? Millions of Americans are doing this right now for protection, and you should think about it too. A company I trust and recommend is Preserve Gold. They will go all over your options and make sure the process of acquiring precious metals is simple and easy. So if you're looking to help protect your retirement with a trustworthy company, Request your free investment guide from the experts at Preserve Gold. Preserve Gold is accredited by the Better Business Bureau, and they have hundreds of 5-star reviews, so you know that you're in good hands. Just text Collins, Collins, to 50505. As an exclusive offer for my listeners, they'll get up to $15,000 in free gold and silver with a qualifying purchase on a retirement account rollover. So don't wait. Text Collins to 50505 today and get your free gold and silver investment guide and take the first step. Again, text Collins to 50505 to get your free guide from the good people at Preserve Gold.
Hey, everybody. As you can tell, I'm not real happy about what happened over the weekend in the Secret Service, in which we'll go on probably more in depth through at a later broadcast. But here on this Monday, we've also just had breaking news. As we were taping this podcast, getting it ready for you, the case in South Florida, Judge Aileen Cannon has thrown out the documents case on Jack Smith related to something that we mentioned briefly on the podcast a little bit ago, and that was when Clarence Thomas actually invoked in the immunity case against Donald Trump, talking about the special counsel. I've got a good friend and a good part, the one I wanted to bring in for this show. He and I are on TV a lot together. He gives great insight, legal insight. Ben Weingarten from The Federalist and others is here with me. Ben, this is huge.
Congressman, it is, and thanks for having me. Justice Thomas just 2 weeks ago opened the door for Judge Cannon to adjudicate over a single basic question, essentially. Is Jack Smith, as special counsel, legally appointed to hold that office? And today, Judge Cannon ruled, and she has dismissed the special counsel's case, the so-called documents case down in Florida, on two grounds. That one, the special counsel's office is not a lawfully appointed position, and two, they're not lawful appropriations funding that office. So Justice Thomas opened the door in his concurrence in the immunity case, and now Judge Cannon has walked through it and really, in my view, eviscerated for, I guess we're up to the third or fourth time now, AG Merrick Garland's Justice Department on its lawlessness in the lawfare inquisition that it's been waging against Donald Trump and really, ultimately, against the Constitution.
Exactly. Man, let's take this a step right here, because everybody understands there's two cases that Special Counsel Smith is brought, and you and I could probably do an entire podcast on, frankly, the ineptness of Jack Smith and I don't know about you, but I'm trying to still figure out what part of law school he slept through, or basically he's like the guy in the regular art class who wants to draw the Rembrandt. He thinks so far outside the lines and makes up crap. But there are two cases here. The one in D.C., which deals with Jan 6, which they've already had some hits on with the obstruction of proceedings, those kind of things. And now you have the one in South Florida. You also have a tale of two judges. One judge who seemingly does the homework and the due diligence much to the left's chagrin, and that's Judge Cannon, who actually has hearings on this kind of thing. And then you had the judge in the J6 case, Chuckin, who does not and just sort of passes it along to the appellate court. This one only applies to Florida, correct?
That's correct.
How could, though, but you got to think about this. Now, number one, Clarence Thomas threw this out in his concurrence and in the immunity case, which I thought was in some ways interesting because you don't normally see what would be, frankly, telegraphed how they would rule in a case that could be pending. I thought that was very interesting of Judge Thomas. Look, Judge Thomas is a very misunderstood and very brilliant justice. And I think he's just looking at this and saying, look, I'm going to go ahead and say it now. This is a problem, so when you bring it. So when they bring this to the Supreme Court, which it will have to go through the district, then it'll get there eventually. But this case is, for all intents and purposes, South Florida case is done for now. This could also affect the
December. It's totally on ice.
Yeah, it's done. The case in which was already on life support in the D.C. circuit is directly affected to this. Do you see any implications from the judge there that they may put this one on hold pending this appeal?
Well, in terms of practically how the process works, and you would probably have some more insights into this than I might, I have to imagine that you would instantly have a motion brought in Judge Chutkan's court. And I'm trying to recall if former Attorney General Ed Meese, he had put forth an amicus brief on this issue before. I don't recall if that was in D.C. or Florida or both, but you would have to believe that a motion would instantly be brought arguing that on the very grounds that the special counsel case in Florida has now been dismissed, that the same be done in D.C. And then I imagine that this will probably somewhat quickly then work its way through the appellate process and then ultimately to the Supreme Court. And it's totally reasonable that Justice Thomas would ask the very basic question. There have been claims made in those amicus briefs and more broadly, very basic constitutional questions about, can someone who's not appointed to this position, and there's no legislation explicitly that creates an office like Jack Smith's, can they be a super prosecutor essentially and go after the former president and potential future president of the country, and not just him, but anyone who might be in this position? These are very basic matters of separation of powers. If the legislative branch doesn't say you can create this office, then how can Merrick Garland go and create this office and get perpetual, indefinite, and potentially infinite funding for it? Because wouldn't this mean that you would have lawfare prosecutions perpetually against political figures going forward? And that's what's at stake. And I think that's why Justice Thomas asked the question. But let's note, last but not least, he was the only person that filed that concurrence. There was no one else who would attach their names to that concurrence, which I also think is telling and might tell us how this ultimately plays out in the courts as well.
Yeah, I think it could, because they're not going to say it. Do you think that, and again, this is just, and I say this, here on the podcast from a very, I'll say, gleeful kind of position, Jack Smith's own hubris of his attorneys dealing with Cannon and dealing, they were having to answer for stuff that they didn't want to answer to, but their own answers were really what killed them in this.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. And we can go back and look at Jack Smith's history. He has a history of getting smacked down, including unanimously at Supreme Court. That's with justices from the left and the right. And that speaks to, I think, to your point, the hubris and the animus and the zealotry that he has. And to your point, Judge Cannon asked basic questions about fundamental aspects of the special counsel's case from the very start. And Jack Smith basically said, who are you to ask these questions? And he had a media, of course, that was playing the role of saying, well, this is a Trump judge and this is a Republican judge in a red state. But that really doesn't wash. There were so many different deficiencies with this case from the very start. So many basic questions like, you're running this grand jury process in Washington, D.C., and then you're going to go bring it down to Florida. And how are you bringing this case when you don't bring mishandling of classified documents case against everyone else and their mother in Washington, D.C.? All of those basic questions. And Jack Smith, I think, sort of took this posture of, who are you to question me? And we're part of the Biden Justice Department. And if you do this, we're going to try to go over your heads and appeal everything. And I think it backfired bigly on him.
Yeah, the immunity case especially, and look, I believe Chutkan I think Chutkan in many ways proved unfit for the bench in the way she's handled this case. And I think the Supreme Court actually implied that as well. And it's like, look, we're sending you back to answer questions that should have been answered to start with. It's almost like the teacher giving back the paper to the student and saying, look, I asked you to write a paper, but you didn't answer the basic questions to then turn it into me. You're expecting me just to accept, something here that should have been at least investigated beforehand. Cannon didn't do that. Now, Cannon's under a lot of fire, and I was just reading before we head on again. This is breaking here on Monday morning. So the podcast, you folks, you're hearing it today. I mean, not 10 minutes after it, Drudge Report run, MAGA judge tosses disclosure case. We are just coming out of a weekend in which you see this kind of rhetoric amped up, and now we have a site like Drudge that is actually painting a federal court judge as a MAGA. I mean, Ben, we've got to get over this at some point.
I think, and it's not clear how we're going to get there, because as we saw in the immediate wake of the assassination attempt, you had AOC, and call AOC not an avatar for the Democrat Party, but she obviously represents a progressive wing of it. And she's calling Trump a fascist within hours after.
Yep.
You had Morning Joe pull it off the air this morning. Wouldn't put them out there because they're too afraid of what was going to be said. There's been assassination porn against Donald Trump for years. Remember, There was a Shakespeare play put on in New York 7 years ago, where they have an assassination scene, and there's someone who looks like Trump in that scene. I mean, over and over again, if you call Donald Trump a Nazi, a fascist, Hitler, he's going to destroy democracy over and over and over again, perpetually, you say he's this threat to democracy, then the question becomes, what wouldn't you do to stop a person like that? And so it's very clear. We can go back to the attempt against Justice Kavanaugh as well. We can talk about the shooting, of course, of your former colleague, Steve Scalise, and on and on. It's incredibly disturbing. And I'm very careful. You don't want to link someone's speech to someone else's act. You have to be very careful in that for incitement and what this means for censorship and all those different core questions. However, it's very clear that there's an environment created of hysteria and saying this man is a dangerous threat and his supporters are dangerous, and we've got to stop it, and we've got to do anything we can to stop it. And they surveilled him, they spied on him, they sabotaged him, they impeached him twice. They sought to prosecute him with the kind of prosecutions we've never seen, bankrupt him through those cases. They attempted to gag him, slander him mercilessly, and then you get this at the end of the day. And I don't see any contrition on the part of those who created that environment. You see Joe Biden comes out and speaks, and he talks about purported attacks on the left wing, and he tries to compare the Gretchen Whitmer case to an assassination attempt. And that tells you all you need to know. I don't think they're going to stop. Maybe the politics will chasten them to some degree, but on the merits, I don't think we've seen a fundamental change, and that augurs very dark things for the country and volatility, the likes of which we've probably never seen in our lifetime over the next 4 months to come.
Yeah, I agree. It's one of those things where they have nothing to run on. And I'd say in the first part of this podcast that, I want this to be about the next, 3 months, 4 months, looking at the policies. I want to hear Joe Biden explain an open border, explain an economic situation, explain why they, and put this back. Now, granted, this assassination attempt, does change that. I think it infirms that, in this whole court lawfare that they're going after, I think they're now stuck with Biden. I don't think they can get rid of Biden at this point. I mean, every day was getting closer to where that was going to happen anyway. Final word. I heard it said, and I haven't researched this enough. I did very little federal work, but the issue here could, and this I think runs into sort of a similar problem with maybe an enhanced way of fruit of the poisonous tree kind of thing. It was said a few weeks ago by a liberal. I saw that they said, well, fine, Jack Smith just basically recuses himself, gives it to the U.S. attorney in South Florida, and the U.S. attorney just refiles the case. But that would have to restart the entire clock. It restarts everything else about this. And I think it even still brings up the problem of the grand jury in D.C. taking it to a grand jury in Florida. And then just the whole, we faked again, we haven't even discussed the faking of the pictures and the faking of the stuff that was leaked. Is that even a real possibility, or where do you see this right now?
Faking the picture and tampering with the evidence as well.
Yeah.
It's just defective in so many ways. I think from a practical perspective, you're right. If you were the Justice Department and you were devoted to ensuring that this case is seen through to whatever outcome, then you have to refile it, and you have to refile it with an officer that is constitutionally in that office. I think there comes a question for the Justice Department of, at what point do you cut your losses, and prosecutorial discretion at the end of the day. Prosecutorial discretion should have militated against bringing this case in the first place. It didn't. We've heard them say that they are willing to prosecute right up until the point of Inauguration Day in 2025. If that is still the posture in a post-assassination attempt country, then I'm sure they'll pull out all the stops, and they'll never stop with this. And they really believe that the documents case has more merits than the other case in D.C. Yeah. So we'll have to see how Merrick Garland's Justice Department responds. They may say, well, look, the courts have now tried to impose their will upon the DOJ. We can't allow that, and so we're going to fight to the death in the appellate process and then at the Supreme Court, and I'm sure they probably will. After all that, depending on the clock, I guess we'll see who's the precedent at that point in time. But could they go refile the case? Sure, but I think the odds have gone down significantly in the wake of the assassination attempt and the environment that we're in.
I think so. Folks, glad you're on the podcast today. This is why we try to have him today. Worked out perfectly to get somebody in who's watched this. I've watched him as well. Ben Weingarten, thank you for being a part of this discussion on this really breaking news Monday.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, take care. Folks, that's it for the Doug Collins podcast today. A lot more left this week. You never know what's going to happen. We'll see you again on the Doug Collins podcast.